Now it's time to have some real family fun painting pumpkins. But you're going to need some materials, so let me tell you what those are. The first thing I'd recommend is you want to have newspaper down on your table before you paint. The other thing you will need is a paper plate. That's going to act as your palette where you can lay out your paints. I recommend having white and also some black. And I like having orange that's kind of acts as white out if I need to cover up a line or anything like that. The other colors, I would suggest having them bright colors so they really stand out. You could use a plastic knife or a palette knife to mix your colors. Also have some containers of water. You want to have more than one, so when you wash out your brushes, you have some different containers. It helps keep your colors cleaner. And as far as paintbrushes, I would use some small tip paintbrushes. Now the kind of paint you can use, some people do use poster paint, but I recommend using acrylic paint. It's water-based, and if you need to wipe any of it off, it's easy to wipe off with a wet paper towel. And that brings me to paper towels. So I'd recommend having your paper towels. So now I'm going to let you pause the video and gather your materials, and we'll meet back here and we'll start painting. Now that you have all your materials ready, we're ready to paint. But before we do that, let me give you a few painting tips. The first tip is how to use your brush. So what you want to do is when you're painting, you want to make sure not to smash your brush down like that. You won't get those nice thin lines or the strokes that you may want. So I always tell students, you want to use the tip of the brush and just pretend that you're petting a kitten or a puppy, and you'll get those nice strokes and thin lines. And remember, if you have a pretty thick brush, you could always turn it on its side and you can get a thinner line that way. The next thing I want to talk about is your colors. So whenever you are using your brush, you use, for example, yellow. After you're done with that, you want to wash your brush out in your water container. I also will use a paper towel just to check that I got all the color out of it. And then you can go and use a new color. So again, always clean your brush when you change colors. And that brings me to water containers. As I said before, you want to have at least 2 water containers. So what I like to do is when I'm using dark colors, I use one container for that, washing out my brush. When I use lighter colors, that's my second container. And whenever I use a lighter color, I wash my brush out. And that just keeps my colors cleaner, and they don't get very muddy that way. And they stay nice and bright. And then, as I suggested before, that I recommended using a plate. Artists call that a palette. And what that does is it keeps your colors separate. Okay, so if I were to take these colors and I mix them all in the middle, I might have a big mud pie on my hands. So the paper plate or palette helps you keep your colors separate, and again, that keeps them nice and clean. And then after you're painting, if you have to do some cleanup work, you can always use Q-tips. Now I've given you a lot of information, so don't worry, because as I'm demonstrating in the video, I'll be talking more about these painting tips and reminding you of them. Okay, now also in this video, what I'm going to be showing you is that I'm going to use black paint to trace my marker lines. You have an option, because if you don't want to do that and you want to go straight to color and start painting with color, that's totally fine. Just after you paint, let everything dry really well and look at your pumpkin, and if you feel like you need to define your shapes or outline your shapes, you can do that. And you don't have to do it with the black paint. You could actually do it with the marker. But you just want to be careful, because you have to make sure that paint is 100% dry. before you use that washable marker to trace your painted shapes. If you don't, it won't work. The paint's wet, and then also you'll ruin your marker. Okay, now let's start painting. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use the black paint and go over my lines. So I'm going to get my brush a little bit wet, not too much, and just a little bit. And I'm going to start to do my tracing of my lines. Okay, now I'm going to continue to trace all my marker lines with black paint. And then I'll let that dry. Then the next step is I'll apply the colored paint. It's a good idea to let that black paint dry, because when the black mixes with those other colors, it's going to muddy your colors. If it's taking too long to dry, you can always use a blow dryer to speed up the process. Okay, so now I'm going to let you go ahead and trace all your black lines with the black paint. Now that I've finished painting all those lines with black paint, I'm ready to go in and start touching some things up. So what I like to do is have a couple of Q-tips handy, just in case the lines got a little too thick in some spots. See how I can wet my Q-tip, and because acrylic's a water-based paint, I can just thin it out that way and have a little bit more control, especially if you don't have a thin brush. This really helps. So now I have my containers and my water is clean. This brush isn't so clean, so notice I can just use a paper towel too, so I can wet it and then make sure I have all the paint out of it if I'm going to a new color. I'm gonna go for a big red nose here, and I may add some white to that. White's a tint, so that will lighten my colors up. And then after I get the colors on, I'll let them dry, and then I'll go back and touch things up. Now another helpful hint is when I'm choosing my colors, if I end up making my colors all light, like they are right here, they're not going to stand out as much. So I'm going to maybe use a light color and then go in with a darker color here. And then that'll make it stand out more. So then I would just continue painting my pumpkin. And again, you can use the Q-tip to clean some of your edges out. You can let it dry and then go back in with the black to define your shapes more if you like. Remember, if you're having a lot of fun painting, you could always create a two-sided pumpkin. Well, that wraps up our video series on decorating pumpkins with fun faces. I hope you enjoyed painting your pumpkins, and I especially hope that you enjoyed some fun family time together. Now, I want you to always remember, when you are creating art, to relax, have lots of fun, and keep creating. Happy Halloween, everyone.